Since he could remember, Henry had always wanted to be a gangster. In New York in 1955, he looks out the window and admires the neighborhood mobsters. To him, being a gangster is better than being president. In a place full of nobodies, they were somebody. They did whatever they wanted. After school, he gets a job at a taxi stand run by Tuddy Cicero, who works for his brother Paulie, the local mafia boss. At first, his parents are pleased, but they soon grow concerned about his ties to the mobsters. His father, of Irish descent, was sent to work at the age of 11, and he believes kids today are lazy. His mother, on the other hand, likes the Cicero family because they come from the same part of Sicily as she does. Henry felt like the luckiest boy in the world, parking Cadillacs and feeling like part of something big. But he spends more time at the taxi stand than school, and his parents change their minds. His father is always upset about the little money they have, about having a son in a wheelchair, and about 7 people living in a small house. One day, he receives a letter from the school saying Henry hasn't attended for months. Furious, he beats him and calls him a liar. Despite this, Henry remains committed to the mafia. Later, he tells Tuddy that he can't skip school anymore because his father will kill him. So, Tuddy and the other mobsters threaten the mailman so he won't deliver any more school letters. From that moment on, Henry stops receiving warnings and dives even deeper into the criminal world. One day, Paulie hosts a barbecue, and a variety of sausages can be seen on the grill. Paulie is a reserved man who only speaks to a few trusted people, yet many depend on him to feel protected. The mafia works like a kind of police, but for criminals. One night, Henry helps Tuddy set fire to a car lot. As he smashes windows and sets fires, he realizes how much his life has changed. He no longer waits in line at the bakery. His family's respected, and at just 13, he earns more than many adults. Later, a wounded man runs into the pizzeria where Henry is. Tuddy tells him not to let the man in, so Henry brings him a chair and wraps his hand with aprons. When the ambulance arrives, Tuddy scolds him for wasting the aprons. At the taxi stand, Henry works nights while others play cards. He remembers that time as a golden era for gangsters, before the trouble began. In those days, he meets Jimmy at a bar, a young man around 28 or 29 years old. He's struck by how Jimmy hands out bills and how everyone treats him with respect. When introducing himself, Jimmy also gives him a bill and asks him to keep bringing drinks. Jimmy was already one of the most feared men in the city. By 16, he was a thug. Killing didn't bother him. It was part of the job. But what he enjoyed most was stealing. He was the kind of person who always rooted for the villains in movies. Once, he hijacked a truck without resistance, gave the driver some money, and earned the nickname Jimmy the Gent. The police, unable to catch him, end up working with him. Later, at the taxi stand, Jimmy and Tommy unload stolen cigarettes and help a woman carry them to her car. Jimmy introduces Tommy to Henry. When a patrol car shows up, Jimmy bribes the officers with a few cartons of cigarettes. Henry starts selling cigarettes, but some undercover detectives catch him. Tommy escapes, and Henry gets arrested. A mafia lawyer defends him, and he's released. Jimmy greets him with a $100 bill and congratulates him for learning the most important rule: never rat on your friends and keep your mouth shut. Paulie and the others celebrate him for handling his first arrest like a real man. Let's start by talking about Henry. Because one of the most interesting questions is, why would someone like Henry want a life like that, despite all the risks? Henry said it from the beginning. His neighborhood was full of nobodies. To him, being part of the mafia was synonymous with being somebody. On the surface, we might think that by nobody, he meant the average people in his neighborhood or at school. But if we dig a little deeper, there's a more painful possibility that the nobody was his own father. Henry described him as a man who was always angry, frustrated with the life he led. He hated his job, hated living with 7 people in a tiny house, and he took out all that frustration by beating his family. And many of those beatings were directed at Henry. When you grow up like that, with a male role model who represents frustration, confinement, and domestic violence, it's easy to understand why Henry would completely reject that life. He didn't want to end up like his father, angry at the world, powerless, disrespected. What's curious is that he never considered that there was also a dignified and fulfilling way to be a father, husband, and worker without falling into bitterness. For Henry, there were only 2 options: become like his dad or like the mobsters he watched from his window. The contrast couldn't have been more seductive. While his home was filled with shouting, scarcity, and beatings, outside there was respect, money, and admiration. He saw men who didn't worry about anything, who seemed to move through the world with total freedom. And the most ironic part is that while he dreamed of that life of freedom, he was literally locked in his room. The mafia life represented power, control. It offered him exactly what he felt he lacked. After his father beat him for associating with mobsters and forbade him from seeing them again, Henry felt completely powerless, but it was precisely then that he learned his first great lesson. When they intimidated the mailman into stopping the delivery of school letters, Henry understood that, with enough power, you could make the world bend to your will, that you don't need to ask for permission. And in that moment, he chose his mafia family over his blood family. From then on, his role model was Jimmy. He admired him. He was fascinated by his presence, the respect he commanded, how everyone listened when he spoke. And from Jimmy, he learned 3 key things. First, that with money you could get people to do what you wanted. Second, that you should never rat on your friends. And third, you must always keep your mouth shut. And Henry would follow these rules for many years, until he faced a reality that would force him to make a life or death decision. I'll continue my analysis of Henry later. In 1963, an older Henry explains that $30 billion in merchandise passed through Idlewild Airport, and his crew stole whatever they could. They had contacts working there who tipped them off about incoming shipments. If an airline or trucker became difficult, Paulie used his influence to apply pressure. Whenever they needed money, they hit the airport. At Sonny's Bamboo Lounge, Henry and other mobsters gather to talk business. An Air France employee, Frenchie, tells Henry and Jimmy about a major shipment on the way. Later, they sit at the table, where Tommy starts telling various humorous stories, keeping everyone engaged and laughing. Amid the laughter, Henry tells him he's a great storyteller and very funny. Suddenly, the mood shifts. Tommy looks at him seriously, and completely changing his tone, asks what he means by that. He says, "Funny how? Like I'm amusing? Like a clown? I'm here to entertain you?" The tension spikes instantly. No one knows if he's joking or about to explode, until Tommy bursts out laughing and reveals he was messing around. Everyone relaxes. And just as the tension dies down, the owner of the place, Sonny, comes over to confront Tommy about a $7,000 debt, and Tommy responds by smashing a bottle over his head. An interesting fact about this bar scene is that it's based on a real experience Joe Pesci had, the actor who plays Tommy. When he was young, Joe worked as a waiter, and on one occasion, he accidentally told a real gangster that he thought he was funny, and realized that those kinds of comments don't always go over well in that world. What's interesting is that when Joe recalled that story and told it to Scorsese, the director decided to incorporate it into the film. But he did it in a very particular way. He only told Ray Liotta, the actor who plays Henry, so the rest of the cast and the extras had no idea it was going to happen. Their reactions in this scene were completely genuine. Just a quick pause to say that if you're enjoying this video and haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. It would mean a lot and really helps me keep making more videos and content like this. Alright, let's get back to the story. Later, Sonny, accompanied by Henry, asks Paulie for help and offers him a partnership in the lounge in exchange for protection. Paulie agrees, but he starts charging everything on credit, knowing no one will pay. They liquidate the merchandise, strip the place, and eventually burn it down. While the place is on fire, Tommy asks Henry to go on a double date with Diane and her friend Karen. Henry reluctantly agrees. Diane and Tommy hit it off right away, but Karen is bored. Henry leaves early with an excuse. He stands her up on a second date. Karen gets Tommy to take her to find him. Henry explains that he thought she was going to reject him. She lets him make it up to her, and they agree to go out again. When Henry picks her up, he meets her mother and takes Karen to the Copacabana, impressing her with his connections. He tells her he works in construction. Later, Henry and Tommy steal $420,000 from the Air France cargo terminal without using weapons. They give Paulie his cut and celebrate. Afterward, Henry and Karen spend time at a beach club, where she introduces him to her neighbor, Bruce. At a nightclub, they receive champagne sent by Bobby Vinton. Karen is amazed at how exciting it is to be with Henry, with so many connections and everyone treating him so well. At Maury's wig shop, he complains that Jimmy is demanding more money than they agreed on. Henry tries to calm things down, but Jimmy loses control and attacks Maury with a phone cord, demanding payment. Just then, the phone rings. It's Karen, telling Henry that her neighbor Bruce tried to touch her. Henry storms out of the shop, confronts Bruce, and beats him with a pistol, warning him that if he comes near her again, he'll kill him. Henry and Karen get married in a Jewish ceremony. Paulie and the entire mafia attend the reception. Karen is introduced to the mobsters and their wives. Paulie gives him an envelope full of $100 bills, and Henry soon realizes that everyone else is doing the same, while he stashes the money under the table. At Karen's parents' house, her mother asks about Henry, who's always out late at night. Karen defends him, but her mother insists that a normal person doesn't live like that. At a gathering at Mickey's house, Karen listens to other women talk about their criminal husbands. She begins to wonder if she can live in that world. Back at home, she tells Henry she's afraid he'll get arrested. He tells her that only fools end up in jail, that everything's under control, and that it's just business. Karen starts to adapt. She sees Henry and his friends as ordinary people who make money by cheating the system. because they weren't doctors or rich, and this was their way of getting ahead. Later, Henry and Tommy hijack a truck. Karen narrates that the group was very close-knit, and being together all the time made everything seem more normal. Karen explains that there were always cops wanting to search the house, but in truth, they were just looking for a bribe. At a bar, a mobster from the Gambino family named Billy Batts celebrates his release from prison. When he sees Tommy, he jokes about his past as a shoeshine boy, but Tommy takes it badly. Billy keeps teasing and humiliates him in front of everyone. Tommy leaves, but returns later with Jimmy, and the two of them beat Billy nearly to death. They throw him in the trunk and head to Tommy's house to bury him. On the way, they hear noises coming from the trunk. They open it and see that he's still alive. Tommy finishes him off by stabbing him repeatedly. Tommy is probably the most terrifying character in the entire film. He's charming, even funny, but he's also a sadistic psychopath, someone who enjoys every part of the harm he causes, who takes pleasure in others' suffering without the slightest trace of guilt. And what makes him even more dangerous is how volatile he can be. You never know what word, what joke, or what gesture might make him snap. He could be laughing with you one second, and the next have a gun to your head. And the most unsettling thing of all is that his portrayal in the film isn't far from the real man he was based on. According to those who knew him, Tommy was one of the most notorious and unstable hitmen of his time. He was known for violent outbursts that often had no logic behind them, and for the sick pleasure he took in his work. Now, it's worth noting that almost everything known about the real Tommy comes from the testimony of Henry Hill, as documented in the book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, which served as the basis for the film. Some people have indeed questioned parts of Henry's account, but the fact remains that, accurate or not, it's still the most detailed source that exists on Tommy's life, and it's from there that I'm building this analysis. One particularly interesting point Henry mentions is that the real Tommy, just like in the film, was always trying to protect the image of being the toughest and the most feared, as if he constantly had something to prove. And apparently he did. His brother, who was also involved in the mafia, had turned in some people years earlier, and Tommy, trying to redeem the family name and reaffirm his loyalty, felt that he had to make up for it by being the most violent, the most extreme. That insecurity might explain why he reacted with such anger and fury to any comment he perceived as a mockery or sign of disrespect. That personality trait, the hypersensitive ego, is clearly portrayed in the film. He's funny, makes the group laugh, has charisma, but at the same time, he's paranoid, impulsive, unable to control his reactions when he feels humiliated or ridiculed. He couldn't stand being seen as less in any situation, not even as a joke. Any disrespect, real or imagined, was answered with violence. And that included his own friends. A friend could mean nothing to him in a matter of seconds. According to Henry, that was something everyone knew. Tommy was unpredictable. He could be telling jokes one moment, and the next, kill someone just for looking at him the wrong way. And that's what made him so terrifying, how little it took to justify his violence, and perhaps most disturbing, how much he enjoyed it. What could have led him to become someone like that? Putting aside any potential psychological or biological traits that may have predisposed him, there are aspects of his environment worth considering. Tommy was born in 1950 in Massachusetts into a family that already had ties to organized crime. His paternal grandfather and his uncle had both risen to become bosses of the Los Angeles crime family. His parents, apparently, weren't directly involved, but that didn't stop him and his brothers, Robert and Anthony, from getting pulled into that world, especially after moving to New York, where the mafia had a much stronger and more influential presence. There isn't much info about his childhood, but everything suggests that, like many others, he started getting involved in criminal activity from a young age. At 15, he met Henry Hill, and it's likely that through him he also came into contact with Paul Vario. But beyond his environment or family background, there was one figure who seems to have been key in his development, Jimmy Burke, or Jimmy Conway as he's called in the film. Jimmy was a close friend of the family and was the one who saw potential in Tommy to thrive in the world of crime. It was Jimmy who took him under his wing, and all signs point to Jimmy also having a major role in shaping that brutal personality that came to define Tommy. To better understand why, pay close attention when I analyze Jimmy later on. Henry explains that killing someone like Billy, a high-ranking mobster, required permission. Doing it without authorization could cost them their lives. On Fridays, the men went to the Copacabana with their mistresses. Henry was seeing Janice. One Sunday, Henry and his family visit Polly. Polly asks him about the disappearance of a man named Billy Batts, which is causing problems. Henry says no one knows anything. Later, Jimmy calls Henry. They need to dig up Billy's body because the property was sold. The three of them do it together, and only Henry seems affected by the smell. When Karen asks about the stench in the car, Henry tells her he ran over a skunk. He buys Janice an apartment near his house. Janice and Henry are having so much fun that she got scolded at work, and Henry ended up beating up her boss. One day, while they're playing cards, Spider, a young apprentice, serves them drinks. Tommy tells him to dance and shoots at his feet, accidentally hitting one. Henry rushes to help him, and they take him to a nearby doctor, while the rest simply keep playing as if nothing had happened. That night, Henry is getting ready to go out, but Karen confronts him for not being home for 2 weeks. She throws his car keys out the window to stop him from leaving. She accuses him of lying and cheating on her. Henry, furious, throws a lamp at her and misses, tells her she's crazy, and storms out of the house. At the next card game, Spider returns with his foot bandaged. Tommy mocks him, and Spider tells him to go to hell. Jimmy applauds his courage and teases Tommy. Suddenly, Tommy shoots him 3 times and kills him. Henry is visibly shaken. Joe Pesci's improvisations, his unexpected remarks, and the intensity with which he approached the dramatic scenes completely defined the filming. According to him, the most difficult scene of his entire career was Spider's death. He spent months reading the biography of Tommy DeSimone, and in the end, all that work paid off. Henry Hill himself said that Pesci had portrayed him perfectly. He also won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for that role. Karen arrives at the entrance of Janice's apartment with her children, yelling at her to stay away from Henry, and spends 2 hours ringing the buzzer, but Janice never comes out. Later, Karen wakes Henry up, pointing a gun at him. She's out of control, but admits she can't leave or hurt him. Henry takes advantage of the moment and grabs the gun, slaps her, and leaves. After that, Polly and Jimmy tell Henry to fix things with Karen. They send him off with Jimmy to relax for a few days. During the trip, they beat a man who owes them money until he pays. When they return, the man reports them thanks to his sister, who works for the FBI. Henry and Jimmy are arrested and sentenced to 10 years. Once in prison, Henry explains how he and his partners live comfortably and prepare elaborate meals, including tomato sauce with meatballs made of veal, beef, and pork, along with steak. Even Polly is there, serving a year for contempt. Henry starts smuggling contraband into prison, including marijuana, heroin, and pills to sell among the inmates. During a visit, Karen enters wearing a large coat to sneak in more items, but when she sees Janice's name on the visitor list, she becomes furious and confronts Henry. She complains about how lonely she feels and how no one helps her. Henry tries to calm her down and tells her they have to forget about everyone else. He explains that he has a plan to sell drugs in prison and that they'll be fine if she keeps helping. Karen fears Polly will find out, but Henry insists they'll be careful. She asks him never to mention Janice again, and he agrees. After 4 years, Henry is released from prison. Karen picks him up and they return to their small apartment. Henry tells her to pack up and look for a new place, as he expects money from a business deal. They go to have lunch with Polly, who warns him to stay away from drugs and to be cautious around Jimmy and Tommy. He reminds him he only got out because Polly got him a job. Despite the warning, Henry returns to drug dealing without Polly's knowledge, using the apartment of Sandy, his new lover and Janice's friend, as a base of operations. He does so well that he buys a new house and involves Jimmy and Tommy. Karen shows the house to their friends, Maury and Belle. Maury convinces Henry to join the big Lufthansa heist. At a bar, they meet to organize the robbery. Each person has a role. Tommy and Carbone will handle the guard. Frenchie and Joe Buddha will control the employees. Johnny Roast Beef will tie them up and keep them away from the alarms, and Stax will handle the truck. Meanwhile, Henry has everyone working for him, including his former babysitter, Lois, who now transports drugs for him. At Sandy's apartment, Henry prepares merchandise with her. While he's in the shower, he hears a news report on the radio about the Lufthansa heist. They estimate between $2 and $4 million were stolen. Henry shouts with excitement. There's a private Christmas party to celebrate the robbery. Johnny Roast Beef shows off a new pink Cadillac he bought for his wife. Jimmy becomes furious because he had specifically told everyone not to buy anything flashy, since the police were watching them. Johnny tries to justify the purchase by saying it's in his mother's name. Carbone also shows up with his wife, who's wearing an extravagant fur coat. Jimmy rips it off and orders her to return it. At the bar, Henry and Jimmy notice several people wearing new clothes and jewelry. Maury approaches to ask for his cut of the money, but Jimmy ignores him. Henry tries to calm him down and promises to speak to him. Jimmy gives Henry a small portion of the money as an advance. Later, Henry brings home a Christmas tree and hands out gifts. He gives Karen a stack of bills and tells her to buy herself something nice. Meanwhile, Tommy kills Stax for failing to get rid of the truck used in the heist, leaving behind evidence that could incriminate them. At the bar, the group keeps celebrating. Henry, worried about the investigation, wants to talk to Jimmy, but Jimmy brushes him off. Tommy joins the gathering, and Jimmy tells him that Polly is going to make him a full member of the mafia. Henry's surprised and congratulates him. Outside, Maury once again asks for his money. Henry stops him and tells him he'll get it soon. Jimmy tells Henry that Maury talks too much and asks him to bring Maury over that night. Henry understands Jimmy wants to get rid of him. That night, they're playing cards at the bar. It seems Jimmy has changed his mind, and Henry is relieved. But as they leave, Maury insists again. Tommy stabs him in the head. Later, Henry and Karen are awakened by Belle, Maury's wife, who's worried because he hasn't come home. Henry promises to look for him. Later, Jimmy and Henry plan what to say to Belle, while Jimmy distracts 2 FBI agents tailing him. After that, Jimmy begins cutting all ties with anyone connected to the heist, and several of those involved start turning up dead. Carbone is found hanging in a meat truck. Johnny Roastbeef and his wife are also found murdered. Frenchie, Joe Buddha, everyone who was connected to the job begins to disappear. Now let's analyze Jimmy. From the moment Henry began telling us about him, it was clear that Jimmy wasn't just any thug. By the age of 16, he was already deeply immersed in that world, and not out of necessity, but because he liked it. He stole just for the thrill. For the adrenaline, crime was a lifestyle that he genuinely enjoyed. Both Henry's testimony and what we see in the film shows us a profoundly violent Jimmy, without remorse, without empathy. But what makes Jimmy, in my view, the most dangerous of the 3 protagonists is that, unlike Tommy, he's not explosive. Tommy is more frightening because he's impulsive. After all, you never know just when he'll explode. But Jimmy, on the other hand, is more menacing because he knows how to control himself. He doesn't yell. He doesn't make threats every 5 minutes. He's cold, calculating, and at times even charming. He gives off a sense of generosity, of being a friendly kind of guy, but it's all just a ruse, a facade. His violence is deliberate, premeditated, and measured, and that is precisely what makes him so unpredictable and so dangerous. In the book Wise Guy, Henry describes him in a way that I find brutal because it perfectly sums up who Jimmy was. I quote, "If there was the slightest problem, he was on you in a second. He'd grab you by the tie and smash your chin into the table before you even knew you were in a fight. If you were lucky, he'd let you live." Jimmy had a reputation for being savage. He could blow your head off without thinking twice. He could bury you just as quickly as shake your hand. He didn't care. At dinner, he could be the nicest guy in the world and then kill you for dessert. He was terrifying and even scared guys who were already scary themselves. The quote says it all. Jimmy was the kind of man who could smile at you and shake your hand while already thinking about how and when he was going to get rid of you. A clear example of this was how Jimmy began eliminating, one by one, everyone who had participated in the big heist, regardless of how close they were to him or how loyal they had been. And he didn't do it because they had betrayed him. No, he eliminated them as a precaution, because he didn't want to leave any loose ends, even if there were no real signs of danger. We even saw that one of the victims was Johnny Roastbeef's wife. Jimmy had no qualms about disposing of anyone, even if he had a close relationship with that person. His circle of empathy seemed to be limited exclusively to Tommy. Beyond that, with Jimmy, there was no loyalty, no real bonds. Relationships were purely transactional. If he suspected anything, even the slightest chance that someone might become a risk, he got rid of them. Just like that. And of course, once you understand that, you also understand how Jimmy's role as a sort of mentor to Tommy likely reinforced all those already problematic and aggressive behaviors. Jimmy didn't just validate them, he amplified them. Jimmy is happy. The drug business in Pittsburgh was still bringing in money, and the Lufthansa situation was beginning to settle down. But what excited him the most was that Tommy was going to be officially made a member of the mafia. Neither Jimmy nor Henry could be promoted because they had Irish blood. To be made man, you had to be 100% Italian. It meant you belonged to a family and that you could do whatever you wanted, except to other made men. But instead, Tommy is murdered in retaliation for killing Billy Batts. Jimmy is devastated. Tommy lived as if there were no tomorrow, as if the rules didn't apply to him. And in the criminal world, when you live like that, tomorrow simply never comes. On Sunday, January 11th, 1979, Henry has a very hectic day. He starts by putting some guns in the trunk and notices a helicopter following him. He has to drop off the guns at Jimmy's place, pick up his brother Michael from the hospital, and collect some products from Pittsburgh. Jimmy gets angry because the silencers don't fit and refuses to pay. Henry takes the guns back and keeps seeing the helicopter. Henry returns home and begins preparing dinner. It's his turn to mix the beef, veal, and pork to make the tomato sauce. His plan is to finish early and get the package ready for Lois. If you were paying attention, you probably noticed a detail that appears repeatedly throughout the film, and I don't think it's a coincidence. Meat. Yes, food in general is constantly present, but meat in particular always plays a special role. We see sausages, grilling, close-ups of overflowing plates of meatballs, juicy cuts, and the tomato sauce recipe with meatballs made from veal, pork, and beef, which is mentioned more than once. And you might think all of that is just there to set the mood, to reinforce the Italian-American lifestyle so closely tied to food. But to me, there's something more. The theme of meat works as a deeply disturbing metaphor for how these mobsters see human life as just more meat. Think about it. These guys kill for whatever they feel like, for money, respect, for ego, fun, out of suspicion, as if people were just livestock. It doesn't matter who you are, how long you've been with them. If you're in the way, if you hesitate, if you look at them the wrong way, they eliminate you. Frankie Carbone was taken out and literally hung in a meat truck. That image was striking because it shows how they saw him, as meat. These mobsters behave like predators, and not just with their enemies, with each other. That's why seeing them cook, seeing them gathered around plates piled with meat, carries a powerful symbolic weight that can't be ignored. It reflects how easy it is for them to kill. A perverse sort of logic that reduces human life to something just useful, something that could be cut, cooked, consumed, and then discarded. Henry and Karen leave at 11:30 to run errands. When they see the helicopter still following them, they decide to drop the guns off at Karen's mom's house. They go shopping to throw off suspicion and return later to retrieve the weapons. At 3:30, they meet with the Pittsburgh contact, who mocks Henry's paranoia and trades the guns for heroin. Henry plans to go back home, prepare the drug package for Lois, and finish making dinner. He calls the house to make sure Lois is following instructions, but she calls from inside the house, which could alert the police. Henry gets upset over her carelessness. He returns home to finish cooking while waiting for Lois's flight. He asks his brother to watch the stove and rushes to Sandy's apartment to prepare the package. Later, he tells Lois he'll tape the drugs to her leg, but she insists they stop first to get her lucky hat. As they get in the car, an FBI agent points a gun at Henry. At the same time, other agents raid his house. Karen flushes the drugs down the toilet and hides a gun in her underwear. Henry and Lois are taken to the FBI headquarters. During questioning, he sees that Sandy has also been arrested. He ends up in jail and begs Karen to bail him out as soon as possible because he's afraid someone will kill him. Karen convinces her mother to put up the house as collateral for the bond. Henry fears that Polly or Jimmy may want to eliminate him. His plan is to sell the remaining drugs and disappear, but he finds out Karen flushed everything. They have a heated argument, but eventually fall asleep in each other's arms, him holding a gun. For years, Henry followed Jimmy's lead. Even when everything began to fall apart, even when he knew things were spinning out of control, he kept his mouth shut. But the truth is that Henry was nothing like Jimmy and Tommy, not even close. Jimmy and Tommy weren't in the mafia just for the perks. They enjoyed crime. They liked the violence. For them, stealing, beating, killing, these were just things that brought them pleasure. Henry wasn't like that. In fact, his most natural instinct at the beginning was to help. When he saw the wounded man outside the pizzeria, his reaction was to try and assist him. Of course, he was scolded for it, but that gesture already said a lot. We saw it too when Tommy brutally beat Sonny. Henry didn't celebrate the violence. He was concerned about him, went with Polly, and tried to make things right. Later on, when Jimmy attacked Maury with the phone, Henry laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, a way of not knowing how else to react. Throughout the film, we saw Henry repeatedly try to intervene for Maury, and something important, we never saw Henry actually kill anyone. The only moment where we saw clear, direct violence from Henry was when he brutally beat Bruce for trying to touch Karen, but not out of power or pleasure. In general, Henry endured. He tolerated. He stayed silent. But little by little, the shocks of reality began to add up. One of the first key moments was the death of Billy Batts. Henry was visibly affected by what Jimmy and Tommy did. When they dug up the body, he was the only one who looked disgusted, while the other two joked about it. From that point on, everything went downhill. Tommy and Jimmy became more and more violent, more unpredictable. When Tommy shot Spider, Henry was the first one to rush to help. And when he killed him, Henry was the only one who truly seemed disturbed. Henry goes to see Polly, who is cooking some sausages. He apologizes for lying to him and for selling drugs. Polly gives him $3,000 and tells him he doesn't want anything more to do with him. Karen refuses to run and live in hiding, but Henry insists. If they don't leave, they're going to be killed. Jimmy, meanwhile, seeks out Karen to ask how Henry is doing and tells her he needs to talk to him. He offers her money, and although Karen is nervous, she accepts it. Then, Jimmy tells her to go to a nearby store, but she senses something isn't right and decides not to go in. Let's talk a bit about Karen. When she first met Henry, she had no idea she was getting involved with a mobster. and when she eventually found out, of course she had doubts, but by then, she was already too deep. She had already tasted the comfortable life, the easy money, the exclusive restaurants, the thrill of being with someone powerful. And walking away from that isn't so easy once you've gotten used to it. What's interesting is that, at first, Henry wasn't even attracted to Karen. It was only when she confronted him that he started seeing her differently, because what drew him in was her character. Henry respected power, and when he saw that Karen had the strength to stand up to him, that's when he began to respect her, and eventually to fall in love. But over time, all of that changed. The more he surrounded himself with Jimmy and Tommy, the deeper he sank into the criminal world, the more his attitude began to shift. What had initially fascinated him about Karen, that strong way of speaking, of challenging him, eventually started to irritate him. We saw it clearly in the scene where Karen confronted him for going out. Henry responded with aggression, with the same controlling instinct he had learned from the men he spent time with, incapable of tolerating anyone setting limits for him. But that scene was only a symptom of something bigger, because as Henry sank deeper into crime, we also saw how his attitude toward his wife and family changed completely. And we didn't just see it in his behavior, we saw it in the very structure of the film. Think about this. After the wedding, his children barely appear. We don't even see when they're born. Suddenly, they're just there. And that wasn't accidental. It reflected how Henry began to prioritize his life. His family took a back seat to the allure of the criminal underworld. The respect, the money, the luxuries, the power. All of that started to matter more than his role as a husband and father. And what we begin to see was a Henry who was increasingly absent. He spent more time with his friends than at home. He cheated on his wife without a shred of guilt. And the worst part is that he seemed convinced his family should be grateful, as if everything could be fixed with money. Henry projected his own materialistic values onto his family. If Karen received stacks of cash every week, then, in his logic, she had no right to complain about his cheating or his absence. If the kids lived in a big house with nice clothes and food on the table, what more could they want? He measured everything, including love, in terms of what could be bought, because that's what he learned in that world. And that logic became so deeply ingrained that it ended up poisoning his personal life. And the saddest part is that he didn't even realize the emptiness he was leaving behind. He believed he was fulfilling his role, as if being a father were a transaction, as if love could be bought with luxury. And while it's true that Karen also let herself be pulled into that world and accepted many things just to maintain the lifestyle, it's also true that there came a point when she realized just how alone she was. Because yes, they had money. They were surrounded by expensive things, but their house was empty of meaning. They had a family, but without presence. They had relationships, but they weren't genuine. They were all transactional. Everything was a facade. Karen returns home, frightened. Henry, meanwhile, meets with Jimmy at a restaurant. Jimmy asks him to go to Florida to take care of someone who ratted them out. He had never asked him for something like that before. Henry realizes that if he goes, he probably won't come back. So he decides to cooperate with the FBI and testify. At the beginning of the story, Henry said he felt like he belonged to that world, that he finally found his place. But did he really belong? Over time, the answer seems to be no, especially when everything became more bloody and treacherous. Henry chose the mafia family over his real family, yes, but he never truly became one of them. He didn't have what it took to be a real gangster. He was surrounded by psychopaths, and he was, almost always, the voice of reason. He tried to handle situations with logic, in a world where everything is solved with violence. He didn't fit in. Even so, he stayed after getting out of prison, because that life still gave him what he craved: luxury, respect, admiration, and also because he had ties to those people, or at least he thought he did. But all of that began to crumble when Jimmy, one by one, started killing the people who had stood by his side for 20 years. When he finally killed Maury, Henry understood that Jimmy was not his friend, that Jimmy didn't care about him. The only thing he cared about was himself, and Henry began to see the truth. Those friendships were never real. They were useful alliances. They had fun together, sure. They helped each other, sometimes. But the moment someone became a financial or emotional burden, they got rid of them, just like that. You don't know who your real friends are until things go wrong. And in the mafia world, helping a friend in trouble is too big a risk. That's why, when that moment comes, betrayal is inevitable. In that world, there don't seem to be any true friends, just people who haven't tried to kill you yet. So when everything fell apart, Henry needed a way out. He knew perfectly well what Jimmy was capable of, and he also knew that if he didn't act first, he'd end up like the others. So he made the only decision that could keep him alive. he broke Jimmy's most important rules. Henry and Karen are with FBI agents, discussing their new life in the witness protection program. Henry doesn't want to live in a cold place, and Karen is worried about the kids' school. Agent McDonald assures them everything will be taken care of. Meanwhile, the FBI arrests Jimmy and Polly. In court, Henry identifies them, and both are convicted. For Henry and his family, disappearing was easy since all their records were false. However, he misses his old life. He remembers the luxury, the respect, the excitement. Now he complains about the food, about having to wait in line like everyone else, about how boring life is. He lives on a quiet street in the Midwest. As he picks up the milk and newspaper at the door, he says that now he's a nobody, and that's how he'll have to live for the rest of his life. Throughout this analysis, I've discussed many factors that influence these characters' decisions. Their environment, their childhood, the father figure, the desire for power, the allure of easy money, the need to belong. And all of that, of course, is important. It helps us understand how they got there. But let's be clear, understanding is not the same as justifying. Because while circumstances play a major role, and while those around us can shape the path, in the end, each person chooses how to walk it. A person's actions are their own, and no matter how strong the influences in the background, what one does with those influences is still personal responsibility. The path these characters chose was a conscious decision. They chose a life that brought death, suffering, and misery to countless people. And yes, some of them came to regret it, but that doesn't erase the harm that they caused. And that's the line that separates analysis from justification. We can explore the wounds, the broken models that pushed them toward that world, but that doesn't mean we romanticize their choices. And that's something we sometimes forget when we watch films like this. So well told, so full of style, that we might lose sight of something basic. Everything that these characters did is not admirable. And behind every elegant dinner, behind every briefcase full of cash, there are bodies. There are broken families and destroyed lives. Thanks for staying until the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe and share it with a friend who you think might enjoy it. And you and I'll see you in the next one.